Hello everyone, we are Kbus Partners. Don't ask why the name. Don't ask why name, trust me, don't ask. Let's just get straight into our proposal. Our policy project is Trails to Rails. One sentence summary, it's about encouraging cycling in suburban areas. Our presentation will take you through an example of how we intend to improve infrastructure in suburban areas so as to encourage cycling among Kuala Lumpur's population. Now, before we get on to the nitty-gritty, let us just take a step back and let us look at existing policy. What is the problem that we are trying to solve? The problem that we are trying to solve is what is often called the problem of the first mile. The problem that there is no seamless connectivity from your house to a public transport station, which is as good as driving your car. Now, if you look at existing policy from SPAD or GDP, immense amount of resources are being pumped into the MRT, into the BRT, and the feeder bus system. Yes, existing policy does have some cursory reference to cycling facilities, but the point of our proposal here today is to substantiate that policy commitment with actual proposals and an actual KPI. If you look at the first mile, the problem of the first mile as it is in Malaysia, there's only essentially one mode of transport within the first mile, that is from your house to the public transport station, and that is walking. We think that cycling is 3 times faster than walking, and that cyclists are willing to travel a distance which is 3 times further than walking. Now, we have a strategy to ensure that workplaces have showers, that workplaces have lockers for people to change their rooms. But let me just challenge the assumption, which I'm sure is widely spread in this room, that we cannot cycle in Malaysia because of the heat. Now, we've gone through Google Maps and we've looked at the temperatures across for a whole day. And the thing is, heat is not so much a problem precisely when public transport is most needed, which is 8:30 in the morning and 6:30 in the evening, so-called peak hours of the day. The peak temperature of the day is about 32 degrees Celsius. But the difference is, we can see a marked difference between that temperature and 25 degrees Celsius. And now to give you guys an idea of what 25 degrees feels like, the current room, I just checked the aircon controller, it's set to 25 degrees Celsius. So if you think that you are comfortable now, you're definitely comfortable on a bike. Now, we're going to move straight on to our feasibility study. And let me just pass this on to Leon, who's going to take you through how we plan to improve infrastructure in suburban areas.
Hi, thank you, Shaun. So, as with any policy, we believe that the best way to illustrate it will be to give an example, conceptualize a pilot. So, for our conceptualization of the pilot, we are dealing with USJ Subang Jaya. The reason we choose USJ Subang Jaya is not because I live in USJ, but because the housing estates in USJ are segregated into very nice square or rectangular grids. So it makes it easier for us to mark things on the map and show you what is our idea. So, we all know that the Kelana Jaya line will be extended into USJ Subang Jaya. There will be multiple stations, and before finally ending at Putra Heights. These circles, they demarcate a distance of 1 kilometer from the stations. We assume that the maximum distance people are willing to walk in Malaysia is 1 kilometer, which translates to about 15 minutes, because the walking culture is not extensive among Malaysians. And as you can see, the catchment actually excludes quite a fair bit of USJ Subang Jaya. And so, as YB Tony just said, buses are disastrously sparse. You're not going to be able to catch a bus if you miss it for the next hour to get to the train stations. So what can you do? What can you do? All the more, you're not going to walk on the yellow main roads because you lack proper crossings, overpasses, cars. You'll find it very difficult to cross, especially during a rush hour. Now let's look at different circles. 2.5 kilometers. This translates to 10 minutes worth of cycling time. By drawing circles like this, we can show that if people are willing to cycle, people have the incentive to cycle, basically you can cover everything, all of Subang Jaya, using bicycle to the train stations. So this is the legendary first mile that we've heard so many times so far. And house, station, how do you get there? We propose bicycles. So bicycles, firstly, you'll get out of your house into a residential road. Residential roads have slow traffic, they're safe for cycling, people cycle to playgrounds all the time, so we don't need to upgrade these roads, you can just use them as they are. But problem comes when you hit the main access roads, which is the yellow roads and the thicker white roads that I shown you in the map just now. These roads have fast flowing traffic, many lanes that make it difficult for you to cut all the way across, hence not so safe for cycling. We propose that you would require either a dedicated cycle lane before it becomes safe for cycling, or a bicycle overpass for you to cross the roads, and before you reach the station. This map shows whether the roads are 2 lanes or 3 lanes. The only 3-lane road in this, as far as this map is concerned, is Persiaran Kewajipan. Persiaran Tujuan has some 3-lane sections, but some of the sections are 2 lanes, and they have loads of turnings with high volume that has no traffic lights. So we will regard it as a 2-lane road. We propose that we make overpasses crossing 2-lane roads, because 2-lane roads are not so, doesn't have so much space to facilitate the making of dedicated cycle lanes. As you can see, you can easily cross from one residential area to another residential area in the safety of firstly the neighborhood roads, then the overpasses. For the 3-lane road, in this case, our idea is about Persiaran Kewajipan. Initially, we've checked this. Each lane is 3.7 meters wide. JKR standards for people drive cars safely up to 70 kilometers per hour is 3.25 meters. So all this, we propose that all this excess space, you can actually just repaint them into, instead of 3 lanes of 3.7 meters wide, we can repaint them into 3 lanes of 3.25 meters. We free up 1.35 meters to make a cycle lane. Obviously, we'll need some legislation for this, which my teammates will talk about later on. But essentially, you free up space for dedicated cycling. And this proposal creates a bicycle lane without the need for disruptive roadworks, without the need to tear apart the curbs. That will take time, take money. Costly projects doesn't seem to be the thing these days. So, what happens when you arrive at a station? My teammate Jian will talk about it.
So what happens when you arrive at the station? Well, you get off your bike and you park. Bike parking is efficient and it is cheap. This is a standard U-rack. They cost about 200 each. They accommodate all locks. They're durable and they do the job. What we want to do is we want to integrate such bike parking into existing park and ride systems. So for example, in Gombak, in February last year, a multi-story car park was finished. It cost 30 million, 6 stories, which can fit in 1,260 cars. The cost per bay comes to around 24,000. 1,260 car bays is a lot, but if we assume that most people drive to the car park alone, that's 1,260 people. Gombak handles 15,000 people a day. That's less than 10% of its load. So what we're proposing instead is a Gombak +1. We take away 1 story and we convert that into bike parking. And what you get instead is 5 + 1 stories, 1,060 car bays, and 1 car bay fits 8 bike bays. So we get 1,600 bike bays. And now your cost per bay drops to 11,000, which basically means you value add about 12,000 ringgit per bay. Bike bays, such as in this scheme, would increase ridership revenue because Prasana owns the LRT, it operates the LRT, and it owns these park and ride facilities. So right now you have 1 car bay and you get 1 person driving in. He pays 4 ringgit for the car park, he pays 4 ringgit for a round trip to KL. But instead now you get, for that 1 car park bay. You get 8 bikes coming in and 8 people taking the train to KL and back. And we don't even need to charge parking for these bike bays to encourage people to bike in. But already you have a revenue per car park bay of 32 ringgit. And if we go back to Subang Jaya USJ, this is the cost-benefit analysis. And you add if Subang Jaya USJ has 3 multi-story car parks planned, 4,500 bays created, if we say 1,500 bays each, that comes to a value add of 50 million ringgit. The cost at 30 overpasses of 300,000 ringgit each comes to 9 million, bike bays 1 million, operating costs for repainting roads and minor road works 5 million. That's a net value add of 35 million ringgit. On top of that, we get potentially 4,000 cars off the road because people are biking to the LRT instead of taking a car to work or having someone drop them off at the station. And it's easy to see how we can upscale this idea. SPID has a master plan to create 16 multi-story car parks. If we assume 1,500 bike bays can be added to each of these car parks, that's 24,000 bays created, potentially 20,000 plus cars off the road. And bike parking also fulfills a very niche area of park and ride. Many LRT stations do not have the capacity, the area around it, to build a multi-story car park. This is the one in USJ 13. Well, it's next to a residential park. But what we want to propose is that under the LRT station, you can place bike bays. You can take a strip of grass and you can add a whole row of bike bays. And for each LRT station, at minimal land use, you can add easily 200 plus bays. Lastly, biking is future friendly. Parking systems can be upgraded. These are bike trees from Japan. And basically, they raise your bike, they hang your bike, and you can get 20 bikes under one tree. But I'd like to talk about future KL. What do we see KL being like in 30 years? Pemandu's GTP talks about KL being a very car-dominated city. DBKL has plans to plant wide coverage trees, walkways for citizens. And it's not too hard to see this as the first step in the process to make KL much more pedestrian and cycling friendly. We could have Boris bikes. We could even have cycling in the central business district. I pass the mic over now to Zhai, who will talk about stakeholders.
All right, thank you, Jian. So now, let me talk about stakeholders. First, the beneficiaries. So there are 3 beneficiaries, the rakyat, the government, and the companies. So talking about the rakyat, so what we will have is can travel stress-free, worry-free, and your pockets full of money. So let's go with my analogy. So let's say you want to go to KLCC from Subang Jaya. So let's say I would cycle to the Subang Jaya KTM and then take a rail all the way to KLCC. It would take me an hour and I would just need to pay 2.7 ringgit. But now looking into, let's say, rush hour driving. I want to drive from that area back to KLCC and look at it. My petrol, it takes me 2 hours, petrol price 10 ringgit, parking, 15 looks like quite low, but again, added together is 25 ringgit. There is an incentive then to actually just take the rail because it's so much cheaper. And of course, without you are not in a jam, and therefore I think you're stress free. So why not? It's comfortable. Now, looking back into the government, since that the government have plans for Kuala Lumpur to be the public transport to be strong within Kuala Lumpur, we say that this solves the first mile problem. As we have known, our buses are terrible. And therefore, once we can solve first mile problems within these small suburban vicinities, therefore the government it is good for the government's plan. And not only just that, it gets people into the habit of taking the public transport, and it kind of rolls on and on. And companies will find it cost effective, as did the showers, as compared to trying to subsidize fuel and parking bays. And also it's morale boosting. Come on, when an employee doesn't need to go through a jam, he's happy, the productivity goes up. But then let's look at the regulators. So for how will we plan this bike roads? So we will synergize between, let's say, the resident associations and the local authorities, for example, in USJ and MPSJ, to actually plot out the most efficient and quick route that has the least obstruction and creates the least disruption. How about managing bike parks? Well, we say that LRT management can do so, and it is a relatively simple thing. You just need to build more bikes, and you just need to have some CCTV, make some rounds, and we can be sure that it will be done. And then finally, in the idea of enforcement. Now we know there's crime and so on is a problem. So since since crime is around, our police force has been deployed around, and therefore they just need to take care of our bikers. Well, moving on from there, since we do have cycling communities popping up here and there, we can work with them, and in the end, create that kind of community support together. When we cycle en masse, well, we have security in numbers. So how about let's look finally at the timeline. So we think about 5 years from planning and pilot study, but how do we gauge, if we have been successful in this? We look at the occupancy rate. As many bikes as car lots are given out, then we say, okay, that means more and more people are taking bikes. And in the end, we can implement in different localities. Now I'd like to pass on to Shaun to conclude our presentation.
Now, there's no improvement in infrastructure will be of any benefit unless it's coupled with a user education plan. Now, we've done the analysis, and we think that with the current culture amongst Kuala Lumpurians, we think that only 10% of Kuala Lumpur population would immediately adopt cycling in suburban areas. These are made up generally by people who are concerned about the environment, or these are basically bike nuts. However, we think with a comprehensive user education plan, we can encourage an additional 40% of a certain sample size to take up cycling in suburban areas. We do have many more details to this, but due to time constraints, we are open to answer any questions on our communication strategy. Now, to conclude, our proposal pays for itself, has high potential for impact, and is future-proof. More importantly, without our proposal, the billions that have been committed to the MRT project will be wasted. Also, our proposal builds best practices for connecting rural communities in the future to river corridors. It also empowers those who are financially impaired, too financially impaired to buy a car. Finally, it also gives a real capability, a real sense for Kuala Lumpurians to grab the carrots and to evade the sticks which have been proposed by the guys from that university in the UK. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about something bigger, because cycling is about something bigger. I want to talk about Malaysian destiny. I want to look at our trajectory for our society over the next 50 years. Cycling is not just about the first mile. It is about being a society that cares. It is about being a society that cares, and not a society that merely stares at one another from behind the glass windows of cars. It is about a society that is trying to free itself from dependence on the car and from petroleum, and trying to find its own way on its own 2 feet. It is about a society that says to a person, whether he or she lives in Bangsa or Balakong, that no matter how far you may be from the heart of action, you will not get left behind. And ladies and gentlemen, I ask you now to remember that saying I will drive with you doesn't really mean anything. But saying I will ride with you does mean something. Thank you.
Guys, you care to tell me how many of you ride the bicycle in Kuala Lumpur?
Well, I think if we're not talking of riding in the city centre. That's the first thing. Of course, I grew up riding my bike around USJ 6. That's where I grew up. So, hence, that's why we're proposing sort of a residential connection to the LRT stations.
I have cycled since I was in USJ 18. I cycled to the Padang, I cycled to the 7-Eleven, I cycled to restaurant Wing Sun Jaya to tap out my char kway teow. And Well, the habits carry on. When I went to Singapore, I cycle because all Singaporean roads are safe. And I asked myself, why can't we have such safe roads to cycle on in Malaysia? Why do we get, if you cycle in Malaysia, you sort of get like mistreated, you're not respected as an individual vehicle unit. In Singapore, if you're cycling in front of a car, the car will slow down, the car won't tailgate you and flash high beams at you, trying to get you to get out of the way. So, like Shaun said, it's a culture, it's a transformation of people. It's not just about petrol, it's not just about money, it's culture and people. Thank you.
Okay, let me continue. You want to answer? Okay, I think your presentation has sort of digressed from public transport because your arguments did not talk about how your proposal is going to help public transport. You are saying that this is an option for people who wants to use public transport. Okay, that's just a statement. I thought you were missing the point that we are talking about how public transport can be enhanced. Okay, so your presentation was more about how do we allow people to get to the public transport system better. Okay, so that's one sort of glaring missing point. The other point that I dread the day when there are so many bicyclists on the road because of road safety, of course. We have not solved the problem of motorcycles. You are going to add more bicycles. That will be, I cannot imagine the day. Because are you expecting bicycle to be disciplined enough to drive or to be ridden on the left side of the road? Or are they going to follow their big brother on motorcycles where they can weave in and out between vehicles? I mean, these are real issues. Okay, motorcycles get into accident because they go in and out of our blind spots, and motorcycles are big. Okay, bicycles are smaller, so the tendency is that they will do that as well. So you can address that. How do you address that? You also talk about bicycle lanes. What are your views of how do we treat bicycle lanes at intersections when there are plenty in USJ? Okay, and the third one is the fact that bicycles are not regulated. Right? You are free to own, to ride, and I'm not sure whether the police have ever given any summon to bicyclists or not. But bottom line, they are not regulated. So these are three big issues that you should have considered.
Now that's a very interesting question actually, because that gives me a very good opportunity to explain the kind of more micro improvements that we're planning to do to the road infrastructure system. Now I think let's break down. We admit that our proposal involves competition between existing motor traffic and bicycles. This can be broken down into a few issues. Number one is the potential congestion caused by narrowing of lanes. Number two is the issue of road safety for both cyclists and motor traffic. Now, as the first issue, we admit that there may be certain potential for greater congestion, at least in the short term, because studies have shown that narrow lanes mean that people tend to drive slower. So we admit that there is a chance for that. However, we think in the long run, greater uptake of this system will mean that slower traffic will be offset by the fact that fewer people use cars. As for road safety, I think there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from, for example, London. There are a few low-hanging fruits in the KL infrastructure that we can easily grab. First is the lack of mirrors on traffic lights. In London, what they have are essentially these mirrors, which are called Trixie mirrors. Again, I'm not sure why it's called Trixie mirrors. Basically just mirrors placed on traffic lights, which allow, for example, drivers of heavy vehicles, lorries for example, to have a look at their blind spots. This is an extremely cheap measure. I mean, the UK, in the market rate for a mirror like this in the UK is about £150. But I'm sure in Malaysia you can get it for cheaper. So this is one low-hanging fruit that can be picked. Number two, before I move on, the importance of this is that, for example, in the UK, looking for an experience in the UK, this is very important because in terms of cyclist accidents, those involving a heavy-duty vehicle are the ones that are most fatal. So having these mirrors will really save lives. Secondly, looking at, for example, DBKL policy currently, we often see pedestrian guide bars along, for example, pedestrian walkways. We can think about Transport for London's more nuanced, modern policy towards placement of these guide bars. The problem with these guide bars, although they serve a certain safety advantage for pedestrians, is that they run the risk that cyclists may potentially be crushed between them and motorists. Now, I would also suggest, again, another low-hanging fruit measure, that DBKL rethink its policy of placement of these pedestrian guide bars. Also because they seem to be placing them and they get vandalized and stolen anyway. So finally, this issue of, as to the issue of traffic at intersections. Now, across the world, if you look at best practices across the world, there are many policies as to how we're going to calibrate the movement of traffic through intersections, especially where there's mixed movement of traffic involving bicyclists and also motor traffic. One option is to introduce priority signaling for bicyclists at intersections where bicyclists essentially move first before cars. So that helps bicyclists move faster as well. As to the issue of motorcyclists, we admit that this is a big problem which has multiple causes. But the thing is, this problem is bigger than our proposal. The scope of our proposal is limited to a 10-minute journey within suburban areas. We think that if you look at the causes of motorcycle accidents, for example, the UK, many accidents are caused by essentially intoxicated drivers at the night time. And I think this is probably the case in Malaysia as well. Our proposal focuses on encouraging bicycle transport during the peak hours of the day, in the early morning and in the late evening. And more broadly, the issue is this. We admit that there is no cycling culture yet in Malaysia. But we believe that once the necessary infrastructure is put in place, once we can get a critical mass going, then there will be a greater appreciation of safety towards bicyclists. As I said, cycling is about a society that cares, and not one that just looks at our fellow Malaysians from behind in the air-conditioned comfort of a car.
I directly addressed that big brother thing you said, bicycles may follow the big brother motorcycle doing very crazy things. Well, fundamentally, if a car goes like that, the car wants to turn, the motorcycle wants to go straight, this is the most common sort of very tyco accidents that we see involving cars and motorcycles. I believe you're afraid that bicycles may conduct these very haphazard maneuvers. Fundamentally, a motorcycle can go up to 40, up to 50 kilometers per hour. It's this kind of speed that gives them the confidence to think that they can outrun a car's turn, which is stupid, but somehow they have the confidence. A bicycle only goes up to 15. Once you cycle long enough, you know the limits of the maneuvers you can conduct. You'll know that I can't follow the motorbike. He has a fuel engine to power his motorbike. I have my legs. I won't be able to go that fast. So I believe it is definitely a concern, but I don't think it is a too big concern due to these differences.
Hi, I'm a cycling convert. I cycled for 2 years to school in Singapore. I cycled at the best school, university in UK. That unfortunately doesn't give you additional points. I cycled UK, and I cycled a bit in SS2 where I stay. To my office, to my headquarters, party headquarters. But when I cycle in PJ, I usually cycle with my heart in my mouth. Because it's not about getting me to cycle, which was the problem that perhaps Elizabeth mentioned just now. It is to get cars to get used to there being a cyclist. And we have a problem in Malaysia where, have you seen pedestrian crossings where a car actually stop and see if there are pedestrians first before they cross the pedestrian crossing in Malaysia? It doesn't happen in this country. It happens in Singapore, it happens in UK, but it doesn't happen in this country. How would you get about that massive mindset changing problem? And perhaps the user education is the biggest challenge you may have. It's highlighted a bit, but perhaps you need to elaborate on that, on how you are going to get people to start thinking about cyclists. And number two problem with your proposal, you did say that you think that 10% of the urban population may resort to cycling. I think if you do achieve 10%, you have achieved overwhelming success. One of the problems with that is that if I cycle to the rail station, I park my bike, I get on the rail, what I do when I arrive at the other end of the station? So what's the solution to this type of issues?
I think I'll address the road safety issue, which is basically changing the mindset of drivers. As to the first issue, as I'm sure the politicians in the audience can agree with me, changing the mindset of Malaysians is a very complex, very multifaceted kind of task.
We are complex people.
Yes. Yes. So among the kind of initiatives that we are looking at are, for example, community initiatives. I think the current model of public communication in the public transport sector has always been the authority talking to people about how they can get on the MRT and how they can get on the LRT, that kind of thing. But as I mentioned earlier, this whole idea of cycling involves a lot more commitment from the people. There's a fundamental kind of grassroots element to it. So, for example, some initiatives which have been done overseas are, for example, this idea of bike trains, where at the start of at the introduction of the biking system, experienced bikers are attached to essentially guide bikers in. Have you guys participated in conga line, like at parties where you? I mean, okay. Some of you might be too embarrassed to admit, but anyway, the idea is this experienced biker likes to lead other cyclists essentially in a conga line of bicycles. This gives them security because they are a big group of people. And for example, if you look at Pasar Seni, for example, if anyone of you has been to Pasar Seni, it's true that cars don't stop for you. But if you happen to stand next to another big group of people, and then cars will tend to stop for you. They are more likely to stop for you. So this whole idea of bike trains is about leveraging the power of big groups of people and genuinely give them a real sense of security and also give them an apparent sense of security. Number two, they have to, for example, the issue of bike fatalities due to motorist carelessness, essentially, has received a lot of community highlighting in other countries, for example. In Mexico, what they do is for every motorcyclist, for every bicyclist that has been killed by a car, they put up a monument by the roadside. A very well, I mean, it's tasteful, but it serves as a very graphic reminder of how dangerous it can be for bicyclists if motorists are not careful.
Just to cut, the time is almost up, but because we are slightly ahead of schedule and Professor James Chin has not asked the question, maybe you can take the question from Professor James Chin first, and then you answer in a few.
There's one more question. Time for one more question. My question is that I've actually gone through some KTM stations where I did see some bike racks outside, and I do notice that some people do this. Have you guys actually done some research on those existing stations where there are bike racks, and what is the readership like?
I admit that we don't have any statistics on the number of stations, and more importantly, the number of bike racks at the stations. But I think the policy proposal that has not been done before is the designation of dedicated bike lanes. I think this is what's stopping people from going to these KTM stations even if they have bike racks.
I think with regards to once you get to the city, the last mile problem. Basically, what we have to return to the gap analysis, and what we identified is that the government plans have got plans for getting people from the long corridors, from the suburbs to the city, and within the city as well. There is a decent spread of MRT, LRT, as well as DBKL has plans on constructing walkways, creating paths for people to walk. So what we identified is the first mile, how you get from your house to the LRT station, and that is what our policy aims to solve.